Why would you come here to see me if you disagree so passionately with my views?
You've insisted all your lives that the very concept of God is ludicrous.
Yes.
Clash between God and Satan.
Ah, but I did not say whose side I was on. I consider what people tell me far less interesting than what they choose not to tell me.
Have you frightened off your professor yet?
Not yet. Soon, perhaps.
This was a lecture that a Harvard teacher named Armando Nicoli did. He called the adaptation of his lecture The Question of God. C.S. Lewis and Sigmund Freud debate God, love, sex, and the meaning of life. And he taught it over the course of 30 years, and it was based on their writings and letters, and then it becomes a play.
That's right, yeah. And that course became very, very popular. It was, I mean, it ran for 30 years, that's a big thing. And then it did become a play written by Mark St. Germain, which was essentially two men in a room and having this great debate, which I found really intriguing, especially, I mean, I just feel like it's the question of our time, but it's, I mean, to me, I was drawn by the idea that these two great minds would actually want to sit down and have this debate and do it with a modicum of respect at the same time. So we developed for a number of years the play into the screenplay.
You're saying people like Gavin Newsom and Ron DeSantis don't have a civil conversation? No, but I get what you're meaning, that this is a way of finding two people who are, let's say, they, you know, idiomatically agree to disagree.
Yeah, they can agree to disagree. And when I first took this on, it was like, I guess 5 or 6 years ago. And at the time, I was like, things are so polarized, it's absolutely insane. And then today, I think it's that on steroids.
Matthew Goode, when you're thinking about playing this character, there's so much research that's out there. What were the things that you found the most helpful in understanding not only C.S. Lewis, but how C.S. Lewis would think of himself in that situation?
One of the things that's always slightly worrying when you play someone who's real, he's one of the great minds of the 20th century, so suspend your disbelief. I found, actually, it wasn't conducive to me having more confidence, reading more and more of his work, because I just, some of it's quite dense, and, you know, I mean, Pilgrim's Regress is not for the faint-hearted, let me assure you. But one of the things that I found obviously hugely useful was the book he wrote in 1955, which was Surprised by Joy, because it's a memoir about his early life and just how much trauma there was in it. And I think, I mean, I loved it. I thought it was a beautiful screenplay, and I know that's uncomfortable for you to hear. But the character is quite reactive, I think. He's not inert, right. But, I mean, he takes a pounding in there. From Freud. I just wanted to put his humanity onto the screen. That was what became, because I'm not sitting there ranting and raving with all these thoughts, but it's important to have looked at it and found it, and then, as with most things, you've got to throw it away and then and almost forget about it.
Tony said that about playing Lewis many years ago. He said
really,
he really did throw that away and did his own take on it.
Well, there is a profound age difference between Freud and Lewis when they meet, and it's the kind of gap that might be present between teacher and student or father and son. So how do you collectively work against it becoming a pedagogical or paternalistic relationship?
What I really loved was I felt like there was a friendship that actually emerged over the course of this, and that you almost sense at the end of the movie that Freud doesn't want him to leave, and Lewis doesn't want to go because he knows it's the last time he'll see him. And I thought that was kind of beautiful, even though they still don't see eye to eye.
When you are thinking about the stories that are unfolding outside of their meeting, you have many options. You have Anna's story, Janie Moore, the mother of C.S. Lewis's friend. How do you decide which stories you want to tell? And there are stories you shot that you ultimately didn't quite figure out how to integrate into the finished film.
I decided that in the end that having Anna Freud be the B story outside of Lewis and Freud was most important to show her attachment disorder and to have that going into the third act, because that is a reveal that Freud has been having his daughter in therapy, which today would never in a million years happen, and he also had Dorothy in therapy. And he wasn't approving of that relationship. So it was very, very manipulative. and slightly twisted. So that's where I decided to land on, although the Janie Moore story is fascinating in and of itself.
It's worth noting that Freud was diagnosed with cancer of the jaw in 1923, 16 years before this story. And his course of treatment would prove over to be incredibly painful. 16 years, he underwent 33 operations and constant recurrences of cancerous sores. He was in agony. I'm going to ask you, Matthew Goode, about creative challenges. Was there a scene that you looked at in the screenplay where some actors do this? You put like a little note, this is going to be tricky, or you think about
I think we've covered it, haven't we?
that proved either to be that scene or not. I know having a mental breakdown in a children's mudroom is one thing, but was there a scene of dialogue that you flagged early that turned out to be either what you expected to be or a different experience?
I mean, they were long scenes, so I suppose those just in their very essence, you're like, oh, it's 7 pages, you're like, well, we want to get this right. But but it was a kind of good challenge. It wasn't like, oh, I'm really worried about it. And as part of my process was making sure for Tony, I was off script, so I knew the entire script before we shot, which was obviously pretty useful. I wouldn't have wanted to have done it any other way. You know what I mean? And Tony, that was interesting for Tony actually, and probably interesting for you, because when you are of a certain age, and it's harder for lines to go in. Right. And so you gave him the dimensions. So he was able to, Tony kind of came pre-blocked, which was great for me. And it was good because it was Freud's house. So we had this innate confidence. And he found that with the movement, it helped him.
So incredible.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was
we're
amazing.
7 pages a day.
Wow.
It was very, very challenging. Yeah.
I want to have one last question for you. If people in the audience grew up in California, when fireworks were legal, there's a warning on the bottom which said light, fuse, and get away, which I like to think is my motto for moderating, but it's also maybe something you do in directing. When you have actors who know their lines and you've created a situation in a set where it feels like they are almost on stage performing, how do you get out of the way, let them do what they have to do, and still get the shots you need? Do you just keep rolling? What were the things that you did to let them do what you brought them there to do?
It was really important to be able to sort of fall down on this and then be able to get back up. And I felt like we had I think it was creating a safe place and an environment that especially with that amount of lines and Tony being of a certain age, to be able to make mistakes and say, we're not going to worry about this and we're going to get right back up and keep trying different things, and having that freedom and that confidence that you could do that in a safe way that allowed for creativity to flow. When he said he's creatively generous, just Tony is beyond creatively generous.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never met anybody quite like him. I mean, the music that we have with the scene at the end of the movie, which is the Vienna Waltz, was something that Tony
knocked up.
He wrote it. I mean, so
we were in a house.
I've heard this. I've heard of this, that he just sits at a piano and writes a.
And I walk in, and then Tony, not only a great actor, it turns out he's bloody brilliant on the piano as well. You're like, oh, so annoying.
But he gave us all. I mean, we were an independent film. We didn't have a lot of resources, and for him to just give us this music for free was a big deal.
My last question is for you, and it's not about limitations of budget or days. Mm-hmm. It's the biggest creative challenge for you in telling this story that wasn't governed by resources, but governed by what you had to do in getting this story told, obstacles in telling the tale that weren't about logistics, but about getting the story out that you wanted to tell.
I mean, the biggest challenge with this is telling a story that has flashbacks like this and fantasy sequences, and finding a way to make sure that the audience can stay engaged with the two main characters. That's the ultimate challenge with it. And we had a cut of the film a little while ago, and it was longer, but we were really rushing. We only finished this film 3 weeks ago. So it's been a bit of a race, but I think we finally got it to a place where I'm hoping, and I hope you all feel this way, but I hope that you can engage with these characters and in this conversation enough where when you do go to the flashbacks, it moves the story forward or adds something to it. And that is the challenge. When you do try cutting it together just with two men in a room, let me tell you that gets a little stale pretty quick, even with actors like Anthony Hopkins. It's not simple. So.
And Matthew Goode.
Yeah.
It's just like, it becomes more difficult when you have actors like Matthew Goode. I hear where that sentence is going.
Yes.
Okay. I get it.
Yeah, no, but it's that was probably the biggest creative challenge, and I feel pretty good about it. But the thing is, when you have two actors like yourself, and that the one thing you can't make up or direct is chemistry and talent, and it also comes from some kindness to one another when you're shooting. But they had that, and that's what I think is special about the film. So
I concur. Matthew and Matthew, thank you for making this movie, and thank you all for coming out.